Now I'm going to take you a wee journey up the road here, and it's only a couple of miles to a fella that has a tractor collection. So he's going to show it to us and talk a little about it. Here we go.
Working on a farm up at the crack of dawn. Jump out of bed, get your overalls on. Grab a slice of toast and whistle for the dawn.
Hi folks, I'm Trevor McBurney, and welcome to the Pinks, as it's called, and I'm glad that you're interested in the tractors, and I'll gladly take you through them. I got into this, I suppose it was by accident. As I was a child, I spent a lot of time on my uncle's farm, and for one reason or another, my mother was ill and things like that. She was in hospital, and I spent a lot of time on the farm. And I found in life that there are certain things that they get into your blood if you're exposed to them at an early age, and I think that's what happened to me, because I was always interested in tractors and machines and farming in the countryside. And much of my life I worked as a civil servant, of course, and in later life I found that I had time to indulge a bit of a hobby, which was vintage tractors. They're vintage now, of course, but whenever I was a child they weren't so vintage, and they were the machines that everybody was using. Now today I've arranged them here in some kind of chronological order. I'm starting with the earliest one, which I'm sitting in the front wheel, which was 70 years old. It's 1952, and going right through to one of the younger ones, which is 1982. So there's a 30-year span, and I'm going to start by focusing on this Nuffield that I'm sitting against, which is the very first tractor that Nuffield made, and it's petrol paraffin, and I'm going to actually start it up for you to let you hear it going, and to see the procedure that you have to go through in order to start it, because it's not simply a case of jumping on and turning a key. In those days things were more complicated. So we'll have a go at starting her. Okay, I'm just going to show you what the engine of this thing looks like as a first, and it's a Morris Commercial ETA engine, which was used in lots of trucks, including World War II military trucks. And it's a dual fuel, so you've got your petrol tank there and your TVO tank here. And they did have electric starters, and that was a really new thing in 1952, so she does have an electric start. The magneto generates the spark. Now, it doesn't need a power source going to it to generate the spark like a distributor would have. It generates the spark magnetically, simply by the rotation of the shaft inside it. And that's where the spark comes from. And you can see she's got spark plugs like a car. So we'll go around the other side, and I'll go through the procedure that we have to do now to get her actually fired up. Okay, so to start, we have to turn on both fuel systems, petrol and TVO. The TVO is mixed up based on heating oil with a little petrol. They have to be both turned on, obviously. The carburetor has to be set to the position where it's petrol only. So we pull out the knob, and if we watch that lever, she's set now, so she's only going to suck petrol. And we have to adjust the regulator to the starting position by the throttle's fully shut off. The starting position is pull it past the stopper, pull it forward like that, and that's the regulator in the starting position. You also have to make sure that the petrol's getting through to the carburetor, so you pull out that wee boyo there, and you can see the petrol coming there fine. So, and the only thing I have to do now is turn on the ignition, which is now on, and she's ready to start. I should explain that if she does start, and I hope she does, she runs very noisily on petrol because she's sucking air down in there, and you'll hear the suck of the air. She's not breathing through this when she's on petrol. She only breathes through that when she goes to TVO. So here goes, fingers crossed. And there she's running on TVO. See how quiet she is. You'll notice on this tractor, and it's also on the diesel one, I was lucky enough to find the original tax discs dating back to 1952, because people taxed their tractor, they put the new one in, they didn't take the old one out, so that when you bought some of these old tractors, if you went to the tax disc holder, you would sometimes be lucky to find the tax discs right back to when the thing was new. And you also find on the very first one, they often wrote the date when it was registered on the back of the tax disc. So there you are, there's a 1952 one together with the 2015 one. Okay, so this tractor here is very similar to the TVO one that you just saw, but this actually was Nuffield's very first diesel tractor. In fact, what they did was they just took the TVO and they put a Perkins P4 engine in them. And at that time, diesel was coming in, and a lot of people preferred the diesel. She's simpler to start than the TVO, although she's heavily dependent on the heater plugs. And a Gas system, which actually atomizes diesel and sprays it straight onto a heater plug, and you've got flames actually going into the inlet manifold, and that's really what starts her. But it's important to me because this was the first tractor I ever restored about 21 years ago. The rams on this loader are, you can see the size of them there. It was a heavy duty loader, and it is actually what's called a Nuffield approved implement. Now, Nuffield didn't make implements themselves, but they worked closely with other manufacturers to make implements like loaders and other items you'll see in a minute, especially for Nuffield tractors. Now, it helped them sell their product, but it also proved to the farmer that this thing was actually designed for the Nuffield tractor, so they didn't have any worries about PTO shafts and what have you. It would fit and it would work well on that machine. These Nuffield approved implements are now very rare. I'm lucky enough to have a few of them. You'll see them later. Yes, this was Nuffield's first diesel. About 38 horsepower, I think it was, which at the time was still a fairly big tractor. But it was a step in the right direction away from the TVO, which was still manufactured alongside this, but increasing numbers of diesel sales at that time contrasted with the decreasing number of TVO sales. They went on making TVOs to about 1957, I believe, but this tractor is 1953. And I think I have a wee bit of a soft spot for it, simply because it was the first one that I restored. Now, this tractor is 1955, and obviously you'll notice that it's a row crop tricycle design. Nuffield produced that row crop version for use in places like Lincolnshire, where they had large areas of drills to like potatoes and various other root crops, to compete against American imports like Alice Chalmers and John Deere, who were sending tractors across the Atlantic with such a configuration. This tractor would have left the factory actually as a four-wheeler, so it's been converted to three wheels at some point in the past. It would have been, because it's 1955, they'd stopped using the Perkins engine by that stage, and they used their own BMC diesel engine. So that's the BMC diesel. She's 1955, and of course she has the ubiquitous sliding hubs that the Nuffields at that time came a standard with, and she's just basically known as a DM4, a BMC DM4. not a Universal 4. The Universal 4 came later. This was just, at this stage, Nuffield didn't make a 3-cylinder. They only made a 4-cylinder. So they didn't have to say Universal 4, Universal 3. This was just BMC Nuffield Universal. You'll also note that there's only one headlight on this tractor, and indeed the other two older tractors. They thought one was enough, and you could get two as an option if you wanted. But the other point is that most of these older tractors had the pulley on the other side. Now this one hasn't got a pulley on at the moment, but that's the other reason why. That's the other reason why there's only one headlight. This is another example of a Nuffield approved implement, and it's a hammer mill. And you would have put your grain in the bottom chute. No, sorry, that's wrong. You put your grain in the top chute, because there's actually two chutes here. The top one is to regulate the amount of grain that would go in. But if you wanted, lift that one up, and you could put something like a small sheaf in directly into the hammer mill and get it chopped up to provide cattle food. They would have eaten the straw and the grains, you see. So this was made by Scottmech in Scotland. It's similar to the Ferguson one, only a different colour and a few wee minor odds and ends, but it's essentially the same machine, made specially for a Nuffield tractor. The linch pins are slightly different, the attachment pins and a few other wee differences, but made specially for Nuffield, and it's quite a rare item. Belt driven, of course. This is a Nuffield Universal 4, which is 1959, and by that stage they were becoming a little more modern. You'll see it has got power steering, which was one of the very first tractors to have power steering. By this stage it had about, I think it was 55 horsepower roughly, and again it had a later version of the Nuffield approved loader, which is slightly lighter. You have smaller rams, etc. But 1959 Universal 4, so called because they also had a Universal 3 at this stage, which was a smaller tractor, so they called the bigger one Universal 4. This is Nuffield 460. It's 1962, and by this stage they had made the engine bigger, so it was a 3.8 rather than a 3.4, and it was famous for being one of the most powerful tractors at the time. It had 60 horsepower, and it was, as I say, slightly different in that you now have the Sankey wheels. This particular model has got one set of wheel weights on it, but they still had just the 5-forward single reverse gearbox, and still had drum brakes at this time. Another example of a Nuffield approved implement. It's a 3-4 10-inch plough made by Fisher Humphreys, but made specifically for Nuffield insofar as the headstock is different from their own headstock that they would have put on their own Fisher Humphreys 3-4 plough. Again, quite a rare implement, and has done actually very little work. There's very little wear on it at all. So another rare implement. Now this one is probably my rarest tractor. It's a Nuffield 470 Super, and you may say, Nuffield didn't make a 470, and you'd be right. This is a Cantatore Nuffield, which means that it was exported out to Italy, to Vittorio Cantatore, who was the main importer of Nuffields for the whole of Europe. He was based in Italy, and he was a bit like JCB in that he took the Nuffields and he converted them into diggers and graders and loaders and all sorts of things, including he made 4-wheel drive versions of them. And this in fact started life as a 1060, went out to Italy, was converted to 4-wheel drive by Cantatore, and I bought it actually in Holland some years ago. The significance of the 470 is, I'm not 100% sure, but I think in Italy they had different ways of measuring horsepower, and they were called it a 470, the 70 relating to the horsepower as they saw it, or alternatively they actually tweaked the pump a bit to make her more powerful than a standard 1060. As you can see, it was an export model, so it had the high air breather to stay clear of the dust. And there's your switch, your lever for engaging four-wheel drive. Some of these axles, the very early versions of these were ex-World War II axles that were left there by the Americans during the war. Later ones, I think this is one of them, the Italians made themselves based on the American axles. So she's quite a rare machine. Cantatore Nuffield. This is the Nuffield 1060, the Nuffield that most people would be familiar with. It's late 64, early 65, and was much more modern. Even though it still had the old universal shape, it was much more modern in that it had 10 gears. They now had 10 gears, 5 and reverse, and high and low in each. And again, very popular with farmers all over the place. It also had disc brakes, which were much better than the old drums. And you know, I spent a very big part of my life driving Nuffield 1060s, not this one, but others. And I think this is a tractor that sort of put Nuffield on the map more than any other. She has the front nose weight, which is the Nuffield part. No, there's something about the 1060, lovely thing to drive. By 1967, the design of the Nuffield was becoming dated, and you still had the old universal look that had been there since 1948. So there was decisions made to bring in a new range of tractors, and this is the smallest of the range. This is the Nuffield 425. This particular one's 1969. It had 25 horsepower and was aimed at the horticultural side, the small farmers and people that, you know, or perhaps even that had low buildings. It was actually designed by Harry Ferguson Research, so it owes a lot to the design of the Ferguson T20. It's very similar in many ways, only it's slightly smaller than the T20, but it's a very handy wee article to have in a link box and moving stuff about, and it takes up no space to speak of. So that's the Nuffield 425. We're standing here actually in the middle of Nuffield's final range of tractors, and we've already covered the 425. The next one up in that range was the 345, which was the 3-cylinder 45 horsepower tractor. It was introduced in 1967 and phased out in 1969 when the blue Leylands came out. As I say, this is an updated version of the older 3-cylinder versions, the 1042, the 342, etc. On my left is the biggest tractor in the Nuffield range, and it's the 465. She was 65 horsepower, 4-cylinder BMC engine. This particular one has got 38-inch back wheels. They were a bit controversial, this range of tractors, in that people that were used to the old universal style weren't keen on the bulbous, rounded features of this range. And I think that's part of the reason that they replaced them with the Leylands as quickly as they did, because they only produced them for about 2 years. But some people that had them, they liked them. This tractor, for example, it didn't have 540 PTO speed until it was 1800 RPM, which meant that it was very good in a 4-H harvester. As good as some even bigger tractors. But they did suffer from vibration and other problems. But it was later replaced, as I said, by the blue Leylands. In 1969, the orange Nuffields effectively ceased to exist. In fact, they had changed into the blue Leylands, the 384s and the 344s, etc. And in the early 70s, they extended that range, the blue Leyland range, by the introduction of what they called their heavyweight range. And these were big tractors with 6-cylinder engines, and they weigh in maybe 4.5 tons each. This one on my right is the 285, which was 85 horsepower. The one on my left is 2100, the biggest Leyland that was ever made, 100 horsepower. They were well thought of for ploughing because of their weight. Unfortunately, they suffered from some transmission alignment problems between the engine and the gearbox and the engine mountings, and they didn't sell in big numbers, and as soon as they could, Leyland replaced them with turbocharged 4-cylinder, the Leyland 482 for example. But I like them. They're a lovely sweet running 6-cylinder. It's a 698 Leyland engine, beautiful running thing, and quite rare, and I like to take them out there. The cab, although it looks the same, is actually wider than the standard Leyland cab, and it's just a completely different tractor altogether. Both largely the same. One is just a detuned version of the other, and that's the end of the blue Leylands. Now, the reason that these tractors were designed the way they are, in that you'll notice this chassis rail is completely different from previous Leylands, and if you look at the back you'll see that the trumpet housings are actually Ford stroke County. They had to design this heavyweight range because to facilitate the County 4-wheel drive version, because this is a 2100. There was also a 4100 and a 485 that had the 4 equal size wheels using County axles and County prop shafts. Because they designed the whole range to facilitate the 4-wheel drive, even these 2-wheel drives have got County back ends in them, or Ford back ends. Trumpet housings, you'll see, Ivan has got a shot of them, that they are clearly Ford. So it's completely different from earlier Leylands, designed to facilitate the County version, which was produced alongside these. And I think there were very limited numbers. I think there's something like 100 of them surviving today, the 4-wheel drive versions, and of course they're making silly money. But that's the County connection. The thing was made in Leyland, exported to Fleet in Hampshire where County resided. County then built them up using their axles and produced the 4-wheel drive versions. Now, you'll notice this space in this lineup. The reason for that is that up until late last night I was planning to have a 502 Marshall in there. Unfortunately, when I went to bring it out of the shed, things didn't go according to plan and the clutch master cylinder went bang with me. So it's marooned in the shed, so another time perhaps. The blue Leylands went on until about 1980 roughly, and in 1980 Leyland produced its new Golden Harvest range, and they were fitted with the Secura cabs as an option, and they were different in design, essentially the same underneath, but different in design and look, and they were much more modern. The modern cab, the modern interior, as well as that they had oil immersed disc brakes. So they were a significant advancement on the blue Leylands that went before them. This is a 702. At the moment I have a log splitter on the back of her. It's the last tractor I bought. She's cleaned up nicely, but they were only made for a little over a year, about 12 to 14 months as Leylands, because by early 82 Leyland was taken over by Marshall. In early 1982, as I said earlier, Leyland simply ceased to operate. They were bought out by Marshall. Marshall bought all the existing Leyland stocks of tractors that were made and unsold. They took them back into their factory, and they apparently reworked them, or they improved them in some way, put their own decals on them, and then from that time on they became known as Marshalls. These two both date from around 1982, early 82. They're amongst the first to bear the Marshall name. In fact, it's entirely possible that they had Leyland stickers on them and that they were taken off by Marshall and Marshall was put on. But Marshall had a phrase which said, made better by Marshall, so they didn't just do that, they did other things. These are both 4-cylinder turbocharged engines, 802 and 804, 82 horsepower, synchro gearbox, Explorer cabs. They went on in production for quite some time before eventually being replaced by Marshalls with Perkins engines, because by that stage Leyland had ceased to make the engines for the tractors. And very useful tractors. This one here actually, although it's 1982, which is now 40 years old, it still has the original Cleaver tyres that it was supplied new with. And as you can see, they're not too bad even today. So that concludes my tour of this lineup for now.
Working on a farm up at the crack of dawn. Jump out of bed and get your overalls on.
Get your overalls